She agreed to marry another man until the billionaire CEO interrupted the wedding with their son. Victoria. Alexander's voice carried through the stunned silence of the church. Before you say I do, your son wants to know why you told him I was dead. The bouquet slipped from Victoria's trembling fingers, white roses scattering across the marble floor like fallen snow. The guests gasped in unison, the collective intake of breath echoing off the vaulted ceiling of St. Mark's Church. James Carter, standing at the altar in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, took a half step forward, confusion etched across his face. Victoria? What is he talking about? But Victoria couldn't answer. Her gaze was locked on the man standing in the doorway. Alexander Reed, the billionaire CEO she'd once loved with every fiber of her being. The man she'd walked away from a decade ago. The man whose existence she'd erased from her son's life with a single, devastating lie. And beside him, holding his hand with a mixture of defiance and uncertainty, stood Ethan, her son. Their son, his green eyes identical to his father's, the resemblance undeniable to everyone in the church. Mom? Ethan's voice, small but clear, cut through the silence. Why is Daddy crying? The question, so innocent, so devastating, hung in the air between them, a bridge connecting past and present, truth and deception. The life Victoria had built, and the one that had just come crashing back into her world. Have you ever wondered what would happen if your past returned on the most important day of your life? If you've ever had love come back when you least expected it, this story might just break your heart, and then put it back together again. James stepped toward her, his voice low. Victoria, what is happening? Who is that child? But Victoria couldn't answer. Her past and present had collided in the most devastating way possible, and all she could think was, how did he find out? How did Alexander discover the secret she'd kept for a decade? Alexander took a step forward, his voice breaking as he spoke. I think everyone here deserves to know the truth about our son. Did ambition ever cost you the person who mattered most? Like this, if you've chosen career over heart and wondered if you chose wrong, comment, she deserved better, or he'll regret this forever. Because sometimes, the person you walked away from is the very one destiny brings back when you least expect it. A decade before, on a rainy afternoon at Harvard, Victoria's life had changed forever when she collided with a stranger. Victoria Winters hurried across the Harvard campus, her medical textbooks clutched to her chest, rain soaking through her thin jacket. Late for her anatomy lab again. Professor Whitman would definitely notice this time. She rounded the corner at full speed and collided with something solid. Or rather, someone. I'm so sorry, she gasped, watching in horror as her papers scattered across the wet pavement. The man she'd crashed into was already kneeling, gathering her notes. No harm done, he said, looking up with a smile that made her forget about being late, though your cellular biology notes might need some drying out. He was tall, with dark hair that fell slightly over intense green eyes. His clothes were simple jeans and a gray sweater, but he carried himself with unmistakable confidence. I'm Alexander, he said, handing her the soggy stack of papers. Alexander Reed. Victoria Winters, she replied, suddenly very aware of her rain-frizzed hair and the coffee stain on her sleeve. And I'm incredibly late for lab. Let me walk you, he offered. I can claim responsibility for your tardiness. She should have declined. She had no time for distractions, especially not tall, handsome distractions with smiles that made her stomach flip. But something about Alexander Reed made her nod and say, that would be nice. That rainy afternoon marked the beginning of what Victoria would later call the most intense relationship of her life. Alexander was in his final year of architecture, brilliant and driven, with visions of buildings that would change skylines and lives. Victoria was equally ambitious, determined to become a pediatric surgeon, to heal children others couldn't. They were young, in love, and certain they could conquer the world together. We'll make it work, Alexander promised one night as they lay in his tiny apartment, city lights twinkling through the window. You'll save lives in New York, and I'll design the hospital where you'll work." Victoria traced the line of his jaw. "Is that your proposal, Mr. Reed?" "It's my promise," he whispered, kissing her softly. "You and me, Vic. We're unstoppable. For those golden years." They believed it. Through Victoria's grueling medical rotations and Alexander's late nights drafting designs, through shared dreams and shared struggles, they were the couple everyone envied, brilliant, beautiful, destined for greatness, until the day Alexander received the call that would change everything. "Singapore," he told her, eyes bright with excitement. "Foster and Klein want me on their team for the Marina Bay project. It's the opportunity of a lifetime, Vic." Victoria felt her world tilt. Singapore? For how long? Years, at least. Alexander paced their apartment, already envisioning the possibilities. "But this is just the beginning. If I make my mark on this project, doors will open everywhere." "Years," Victoria repeated, the words hollow. "I can't leave my residency, Alex. You know that." His excitement dimmed slightly. "We could do long distance, or maybe you could find a program there." "There's no maybe about my career," Victoria said, her voice sharper than intended. "I've worked too hard to get this position at Mass General, and I've worked too hard to turn this down," Alexander countered. The argument that followed was their first real fight, raw, painful, with words that cut too deep to heal easily. "You're choosing buildings over us," Victoria accused. "And you're choosing your career over mine," Alexander shot back. "Why is your dream more important than what I've worked for?" "Because people's lives depend on me." "What depends on you? Aesthetics? Skylines?" The moment the words left her mouth, Victoria knew she'd crossed a line. Alexander's face hardened in a way she'd never seen before. "If that's what you think of my work of me, then maybe we don't have a future after all." Days later, Alexander left for Singapore. No goodbye, no closure. Just a note. "I'll always love you, but we want different things. Be happy, Vic." Victoria would replay this conversation 1,000 times over the next decade, each replay ending with a different choice. Each choice still leading to heartbreak. Victoria threw herself into her work, determined to prove she'd made the right choice. She excelled in her residency, earning praise from mentors who had once seemed impossible to impress. But at night, alone in the apartment they'd shared, she wondered if the cost had been too high. Weeks after Alexander left, Victoria discovered she was pregnant. She sat on the bathroom floor, staring at the positive test, tears streaming down her face. A baby. Their baby. She reached for her phone a dozen times to call him, but pride and fear held her back. What if he didn't want this complication? What if he resented her for tying him down just as his career was taking off? Or worse, what if he came back out of obligation, giving up the opportunity he'd dreamed of, only to resent both her and the child later? She didn't know yet that she was carrying more than heartbreak, that Alexander's legacy was already growing inside her, that her choice to stay silent would echo for years. Victoria made the hardest decision of her life that night. She would raise this child alone. Alexander would be free to pursue his ambitions, and she would pursue hers, with one beautiful addition to her plans. Secrets have weight. The longer you carry them, the heavier they get. Share this story with anyone protecting a truth that's destroying them from the inside. Like this, if ambition ever cost you love. Comment, "She deserved better," or "He'll regret this forever." Victoria Winters had built a life that looked perfect from the outside. Years had passed since Harvard, since Alexander, since the choice that split her world in two. She had become one of Boston's most respected pediatric surgeons, known for taking on cases others deemed hopeless. Her engagement to James Carter, a successful financial executive, had been announced in the society pages months ago. The wedding was planned down to the last detail. A tasteful ceremony at Street Mark's church, followed by a reception at the Fairmont. Everything was in place for her happily ever after, except for the secret that kept her awake at night. "Mom, have you seen my blue sweater? The one with the planets?" Ethan's voice echoed through their brownstone. Victoria smiled, setting down her coffee. "Check the laundry basket in my room, sweetheart. I folded it yesterday." Ethan appeared in the kitchen doorway, already dressed except for the missing sweater. He was tall for his age, with a mop of dark hair that constantly fell into his eyes. Alexander's eyes, intense and curious about everything. "James is picking us up at 7, right?" Ethan asked, grabbing an apple from the fruit bowl. Victoria nodded. "For dinner with his parents. Remember to bring your sketchbook to show his dad. He's very interested in your building designs." Ethan's face lit up. He'd been drawing buildings since he could hold a crayon, a talent Victoria both cherished and found painful. It was yet another reminder of Alexander, of the genetic blueprint he'd passed to their son without ever knowing him. "Do you think James's dad will like them?" "They're not as good as real architects make." Victoria crossed the kitchen to kiss the top of his head. "They're amazing, and you know it. You have a natural talent. Just like your father," she didn't add. As Ethan bounded back upstairs, Victoria's phone chimed with a text from James. "Confirm dinner reservations. Mom's excited to discuss final wedding details. Love you." James was everything Victoria should want: stable, kind, successful, without being obsessive about his career. He adored Ethan and had never pressured Victoria about the identity of his biological father. "The past is the past," he'd said when they first became serious. "All that matters is our future together." It was the perfect response. So why did it sometimes feel like settling? Victoria glanced at the calendar on the refrigerator. The wedding date circled in red. The wedding was approaching fast. Soon she would be Mrs. James Carter, and the chapter of her life that included Alexander Reed would be firmly closed. If only she could stop wondering where he was, what he was doing, whether he ever thought of her. That evening, as James drove them to his parents' home in Beacon Hill, Victoria watched Ethan in the back seat, absorbed in his sketchbook. He was drawing again, this time what looked like a towering skyscraper with unusual curved elements. "That's really something, buddy," James commented, catching a glimpse in the rearview mirror. "Where did you get the idea?" Ethan shrugged. "I saw it in a dream. It was super tall and had these glass parts that caught the sun and made rainbows inside." Victoria felt a chill. Alexander had once described a similar concept to her, a building designed to capture and refract light in specific ways throughout the day. It had been one of his most passionate ideas, something he'd hoped to incorporate into a major project someday. How could Ethan know? How could he dream his father's dreams? "Victoria, are you all right?" James's concerned voice broke through her thoughts. "Yes, sorry. Just thinking about a patient." The lie came easily, one of many small deceptions that had become necessary to protect her secret. Dinner with the Carters was pleasant but exhausting. James's mother, Eleanor, was in full wedding planning mode, discussing flowers and seating arrangements with the intensity of a military strategist. His father, Richard, was more interested in Ethan, examining his drawings with genuine appreciation. "You have quite an eye for structure," Richard said, studying the sketches closely. "Have you ever thought about becoming an architect?" Ethan beamed. "Sometimes. Mom says I could be anything I want." "And she's right," James added warmly. "Though I was hoping you might consider finance. We could use another sharp mind at Carter Investments someday." Victoria watched the exchange with mixed emotions. James was trying so hard to be a father figure to Ethan, and she appreciated it deeply. But sometimes, she caught herself wondering if she was being fair to either of them, to James, who was accepting another man's child as his own, or to Ethan, who had a right to know his real father. Every night, after tucking Ethan into bed, Victoria faced the same question. Did I make the right choice keeping him away from his father? She had never tried to contact Alexander after discovering her pregnancy. In the early months, she'd followed his career through industry publications, his success with the Singapore project, his rapid rise at Foster & Klein, his eventual return to the United States to start his own firm. By then, Ethan was a toddler, and Victoria had convinced herself it was too late to disrupt Alexander's life with a child he'd never asked for. So she created a story for Ethan that his father had been a good man who died before he was born. It seemed kinder than the truth, that his father had chosen his career over a relationship with his mother. and she had chosen to keep his existence a secret. As the years passed, the lie became harder to maintain. Ethan asked questions Victoria couldn't answer. What was Daddy's favorite color? Did he like to draw like me? Do I look like him? Each question was a knife to her heart, but she maintained the fiction, telling herself it was for the best. Alexander had moved on. She had moved on. Opening that door would only cause pain for everyone, or so she believed, until the night everything changed. While Victoria planned her perfect wedding, a man she'd tried to forget stood in his Manhattan penthouse, staring at a photograph that would change everything. Alexander Reed stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, a glass of scotch in his hand. He had achieved everything he'd once dreamed of, and more. Reed Architectural Innovations was now one of the most sought-after firms in the world, known for sustainable designs that pushed boundaries while respecting the environment. His latest project, a revolutionary mixed-use development in Dubai, had just been approved after months of negotiations. His team had been celebrating all evening, but Alexander had excused himself early, retreating to his private office with the restlessness that often plagued him in moments of triumph. Success tasted hollow without someone to share it with. His assistant, Mira, knocked softly before entering. Sorry to interrupt, but the Boston file you requested is ready. Alexander nodded, taking the folder she offered. Thank you. You should head home, it's late. Congratulations again on Dubai, Mira said with a smile. Oh, and I included that society page you asked about, page 3 of the folder. After she left, Alexander opened the file, flipping to the third page. There it was. The announcement he'd stumbled across by accident while researching potential clients in Boston. Dr. Victoria Winters, to wed financial executive James Carter. The accompanying photo showed Victoria looking elegant and poised, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. She was still beautiful, more so than he remembered, with a confidence that came from achievement and maturity. Beside her stood a distinguished-looking man, with graying temples and a practiced smile. Alexander had stared at that announcement for hours when he first saw it online, feelings he'd thought long buried surging to the surface. Victoria, the woman he'd never truly gotten over, despite relationships that followed, despite the empire he'd built. He'd almost closed the file, almost forced himself to let go again, when something in the background of the photo caught his eye. A child, a boy, partially visible behind Victoria. Something about the child's posture, the angle of his head, struck Alexander as hauntingly familiar. Using his company's considerable resources, he'd had the original photo series obtained. In one clear shot, the boy was looking directly at the camera, and Alexander felt as though he was looking at his own childhood photograph. The same eyes, the same determined set of the jaw. Impossible, he told himself. Yet the timeline fit perfectly. Their breakup, and a child, who appeared to be around 9 years old. The private investigator's report had arrived this morning, confirming what Alexander's heart already knew. Ethan Winters, born March 15th, 2013, almost exactly 9 months after Alexander left for Singapore. Father listed as deceased on all official documents. Alexander took a long swallow of scotch, the liquid burning a path down his throat. A son. He had a son he'd never known about. A boy who believed his father was dead rather than very much alive and building an empire across the country. The rage came first, white-hot and consuming. How could Victoria have kept this from him? What gave her the right to deny him knowledge of his own child? To deny his son the truth about his father? Then came the crushing guilt. He had left. He had chosen his career over their relationship. He had never once reached out to see how she was doing, too proud and hurt to make the first move. For hours, Alexander paced his office, alternating between fury and self-recrimination. By dawn, he had made his decision. He would go to Boston. He would confront Victoria before she married another man. He would meet his son. Whatever the cost, whatever the consequences, he had to know the child who shared his blood, and Victoria had to face the truth she'd buried for nearly a decade. Alexander Reed, the billionaire CEO who never lost control, who calculated every risk before making a move, was about to act purely on emotion for the first time since that rainy day at Harvard when he'd first met Victoria Winters. The board meeting scheduled for that afternoon would have to wait. The Dubai contracts could be finalized without him. Nothing mattered now except getting to Boston before Victoria said "I do" to a man who wasn't him, a man who was preparing to be a father to Alexander's son. As the sun rose over Manhattan, Alexander made the call that would change everything. "Mira, I need the jet ready in an hour. Cancel all my appointments for the next week." "Sir? What about the Dubai signing? Have Marcus handle it. This is more important." "May I ask where you're going?" Alexander looked once more at the photo of the boy who looked so much like him. "Boston. I'm going to stop a wedding." What if your child grew up calling someone else dad because you were too afraid to fight for them? Like if that thought broke you. Comment, family first. If you believe blood deserves truth. Share this story with anyone neglecting what truly matters. Ethan Winters sat cross-legged on his bed, surrounded by drawings of buildings that existed only in his imagination. Tall structures with impossible curves, homes built into cliffsides, schools shaped like open books. His mom always said he had an architect's mind, whatever that meant. Tonight was different, though. Tonight, he wasn't drawing buildings. He was drawing a family portrait for his mom's wedding gift. James stood on one side, tall and smiling. His mom on the other, her hair flowing like in the photos from when she was younger, and Ethan in the middle, connecting them. But something felt wrong about the picture. Something was missing. Ethan reached for his special sketchbook, the one he kept hidden under his mattress. Inside were drawings of a man with no face, just a silhouette, where features should be. The man his mother never talked about. His real father. "Ethan? Are you still awake?" His mother's voice came from the hallway. Quickly, Ethan shoved the secret sketchbook under his pillow. "Just finishing something, Mom." Victoria appeared in the doorway, already in her pajamas, her face cream making her skin glow in the soft lamplight. "It's late, sweetheart. You need your sleep." "Mom?" Ethan asked as she sat on the edge of his bed. "Can I ask you something about my dad? My real dad?" Victoria's smile faltered slightly. "Of course. If he loved you, why didn't he stay?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken truths. Victoria smoothed Ethan's dark hair so like Alexander's, and searched for words that wouldn't be lies, but wouldn't reveal the painful truth either. "Sometimes," she said carefully, "people can love each other very much, but still want different things from life. Your father had dreams that took him far away. But if he knew about me, would he have stayed?" Victoria's heart clenched. This was the question she dreaded for years. "I think he would have loved you very much," she said, which wasn't really an answer. Ethan seemed to accept this, nodding thoughtfully. "I think he would have liked my buildings." "I'm sure he would have," Victoria whispered, kissing his forehead. "Now sleep. Tomorrow's a big day." Final tux fitting for the wedding. After Ethan fell asleep, Victoria stood in the hallway, leaning against the wall, fighting back tears. The guilt she'd carried for a decade felt heavier than ever. Soon, she would marry James, and the lie would become permanent. Ethan would never know his real father. Alexander would never know his son. It was too late to change course now. Too much time had passed. Too many lives would be hurt. Or so she told herself as she wiped away her tears and went to bed. Meanwhile, across the city in a luxury hotel suite, Alexander Reed studied everything his investigators had uncovered about his son, Ethan Winters, 4th grade. Exceptional student, particularly in mathematics and art. Won the regional science fair with a project on sustainable building materials. Alexander's chest swelled with pride, even as his heart ached for all the moments he'd missed. First steps, first words, first day of school, all gone, never to be reclaimed. His phone rang his COO, Marcus, calling from New York. "The board is in an uproar," Marcus said without preamble. "They're talking about postponing the Dubai signing until you return. What should I tell them?" "Tell them I'm handling a personal matter that can't wait," Alexander replied, his eyes never leaving the school photo of Ethan. The contracts are finalized. They don't need me physically present. Alex, what's going on? You've never walked away from a major project before. Alexander was silent for a moment. I just discovered I have a son, Marcus. A 9-year-old boy I never knew existed. The shocked silence on the other end of the line was followed by a low whistle. Victoria Winters? Yes. And you're sure he's yours? Look at his photo. Alexander sent the image with a quick tap. Tell me what you see. Another moment of silence. He has your eyes. Exactly your eyes. And my mother's chin. And apparently, my interest in architecture. He designs buildings, Marcus. At 9 years old. What are you going to do? Alexander looked out the window at the Boston skyline, the city where his son had grown up without him. I'm going to meet him. And I'm going to confront Victoria before she marries someone else. The wedding is soon. I know. Be careful, Alex. This isn't a business negotiation. There's a child involved. Alexander's voice hardened. A child who should have known his father. A child who's been told, I'm dead. After ending the call, Alexander continued studying the information before him. Tomorrow, according to his investigator, Ethan would be at Boston Children's Museum with his after-school program. It would be Alexander's first opportunity to see his son in person from a distance, without confronting Victoria yet. Just to see him, to confirm what his heart already knew. Alexander arrived at the museum dressed casually in jeans and a sweater to blend with the other parents. His heart pounded as he scanned the groups of children moving between exhibits. And then he saw him. Ethan was taller than Alexander expected, gesturing animatedly to a friend as they examined a pulley system display. His movements were so familiar, the same way Alexander used his hands when explaining a design concept. The same focused expression when working through a problem. In architecture, the most perfect designs start with a flaw that demands correction. Alexander was about to rebuild his entire life around a 9-year-old boy who shared his eyes. Alexander moved closer, careful to remain unobtrusive. He could hear Ethan's voice now, explaining to his friend how the pulley system could be improved. If they added another wheel here, Ethan was saying, it would distribute the weight more evenly. That's what architects have to think about all the time. How to make things strong, but also efficient. How do you know that stuff? His friend asked, impressed. Ethan shrugged. I just do. My mom says I was born understanding how buildings work. Born understanding. Inherited understanding. Alexander felt a surge of connection so powerful, it nearly brought him to his knees. This was his son. His blood. His legacy. For an hour, Alexander followed at a distance, watching Ethan move through the museum with curiosity and intelligence. When the boys stopped at the architecture exhibit, spending long minutes studying the model skyscrapers with reverent attention, Alexander had to turn away, overcome with emotion. What right did Victoria have to keep this from him? To deny both father and son the relationship they should have had? As the school group prepared to leave, Alexander made a decision. He wouldn't wait. He wouldn't let Victoria marry James Carter without confronting the truth. And he wouldn't let another day pass without his son knowing who he really was. The wedding preparations accelerated as the date approached. Victoria found herself swept along in a tide of details, final dress fittings, menu tastings, seating chart adjustments. James's mother had taken charge of most arrangements, for which Victoria was grateful. Her surgical schedule remained demanding, and any free time she had, she wanted to spend with Ethan. You seem distracted, James commented one evening as they reviewed the honeymoon itinerary. Second thoughts? Victoria looked up from the brochure for the Maldives resort he'd selected. No, of course not. Just tired. I had a difficult surgery today. James reached across the table to take her hand. Soon, Dr. Winters, you'll be on a beach with nothing more demanding than deciding which cocktail to order. Victoria smiled, pushing away the nagging doubt that had been growing stronger each day. James was a good man. He would be a good stepfather to Ethan. Their life together would be comfortable, secure, predictable. So why did she keep dreaming of green eyes and architectural sketches? Why did Alexander's face still appear in her mind during quiet moments? Mom! Ethan's voice broke through her thoughts as he burst into the dining room. "Look what I made in art class today." He proudly displayed a detailed drawing of a house, not just any house, but one with distinctive features that made Victoria's blood run cold. The curved roofline, the unusual window placement, the integration with the surrounding landscape. It was the house Alexander had designed for them. The one he'd sketched on napkins during late-night conversations about their future. A house they'd never built. A future they'd never shared. "It's beautiful, Ethan," she managed to say. "Very creative. I thought maybe we could build it someday," Ethan said, looking between her and James. "After the wedding. A new house for our new family." James examined the drawing with genuine interest. "You've got real talent, buddy. Though I think we're pretty happy with our place in Beacon Hill. Right, Victoria?" Victoria nodded automatically, her mind racing. How could Ethan have drawn this house? She'd never shown him Alexander's sketches, never even kept them. Yet here was the same vision, recreated by their son, as if the design had been encoded in his DNA. That night, after both James and Ethan were asleep, Victoria found herself opening her laptop and typing a name she'd avoided searching for years. Alexander Reed. The results were overwhelming. Alexander wasn't just successful, he was a star in the architectural world. Reed Architectural Innovations was behind some of the most groundbreaking sustainable buildings of the past decade. His Dubai project was making headlines for its revolutionary approach to energy efficiency. And there he was, in photos at industry events and TED Talks, older, more polished, but unmistakably the same Alexander. His eyes still held that intensity, that vision that had captivated her from the first moment. She couldn't stop herself. Victoria clicked through image after image, article after article, feeling as though she was watching the life they might have shared unfold without her. In one photo, Alexander stood beside a striking building in Singapore, the very project that had separated them. Had it been worth it? Had the sacrifice of their relationship been justified by his success? She was so absorbed that she didn't hear Ethan enter the room until he spoke. "Mom? Who's that man?" Victoria startled, quickly moving to close the laptop, but not before Ethan had seen the screen.
"Just an architect I was reading about. For work. A new children's wing at the hospital."
Ethan moved closer, his eyes fixed on the image still visible. "He looks like me." Victoria's heart stopped. "What?" "His eyes," Ethan said simply. "They're like mine." Before Victoria could respond, Ethan reached past her and scrolled to another photo. Alexander accepting an award, smiling at the camera. "He has my smile too," Ethan whispered. Then, with a child's devastating directness, "Is he my dad? My real dad?" Children have a way of asking questions adults spend years avoiding. One simple, "Why?" can unravel a decade of careful lies. The moment Victoria had feared for 9 years had arrived. She could continue the lie, insist this was just a coincidence, a random architect who happened to resemble her son. Or she could finally tell the truth. Looking into Ethan's eyes so familiar, she found she couldn't lie anymore. "Yes," she said softly. "His name is Alexander Reed, and he is your father." Ethan's expression was unreadable. "You said my dad was dead." "I know, sweetheart. I'm so sorry." Victoria's voice broke. "It was wrong of me to tell you that." "Is he a bad person? Is that why you lied?" No. He's not bad at all." Victoria pulled Ethan close. "It's complicated, Ethan. Sometimes adults make mistakes because they think they're protecting the people they love. Does he know about me?" The question pierced Victoria's heart. No, he doesn't. Why didn't you tell him? How could she explain to a 9-year-old the complex emotions that had led to her decision? The fear, the pride, the misguided attempt to spare everyone pain? "We broke up before I knew I was going to have you," she said carefully. "He moved very far away for his work. I thought it would be better this way." Better for who? Not for me. And not for him either. The accusation in his young voice cut deeper than any surgical blade. Victoria had no defense. No justification. That didn't sound selfish now. "You're right," she admitted. "I made a mistake, a big one." "We have to tell him," Ethan declared. "He should know he has a son." Victoria nodded slowly. Yes, he should. She took a deep breath. After the wedding, we'll find a way to contact him. But Ethan was already shaking his head. No, before. He needs to know before you marry James. Ethan, it's not that simple. It is that simple, Mom. He's my dad. My real dad. And he thinks I don't exist. With that, Ethan turned and walked out of the room, leaving Victoria alone with the truth she'd avoided for too long. What she didn't know was that across the city, Alexander Reed was making plans of his own, plans that would bring their carefully separated worlds crashing together in the most public, dramatic way possible. 3 days passed in a blur of final preparations. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, a perfect June morning in Boston. Victoria stood in the bridal suite at Street Mark's church, surrounded by her bridesmaids and her maid of honor, her best friend from medical school, Sophia. You look stunning, Sophia said, adjusting Victoria's veil. James is going to faint when he sees you. Victoria managed a smile, though her stomach was in knots. Since the night Ethan had discovered Alexander's identity, a tension had existed between them. Her son had retreated into an unusual silence, spending hours in his room with his sketchbooks and his laptop, absorbed in something he wouldn't share. He'd agreed to participate in the wedding he was to carry the rings, but his enthusiasm had vanished. This morning he'd barely spoken, as the wedding coordinator had walked him through his role. Victoria had tried to talk to him privately, but there had been no opportunity amid the whirlwind of preparations. 5 minutes, Dr. Winters, the coordinator announced, popping her head into the suite. Everyone seated and ready. Victoria took a deep breath, looking at herself in the full-length mirror. The dress was perfect, elegant, without being ostentatious. The kind of gown that suited a successful professional woman rather than a young bride. Her hair was swept up, a few tendrils framing her face. She looked like the woman she'd become, accomplished, confident, ready for this next chapter. So why did her reflection seem like a stranger? Victoria? Sophia's concerned voice broke through her thoughts. Are you okay? Yes, Victoria said automatically. Just pre-wedding jitters. But it wasn't jitters. It was doubt. Deep, gnawing doubt that had been growing since the moment she'd seen Alexander's face on her computer screen. Since Ethan had recognized his own features in the father he'd never known. Was she making another mistake? Was she about to compound the error she'd made a decade ago with a new one? It's time, the coordinator called. Too late for doubts now. Too late for second thoughts. James was waiting at the altar. Guests were seated. Music was playing. The carefully choreographed ceremony was in motion. Victoria took her bouquet from Sophia and moved toward the door, each step feeling heavier than the last. In the church vestibule, Ethan waited in his little tuxedo, the ring pillow clutched in his hands. His face was solemn, his eyes watching her with an intensity that reminded her so much of Alexander it made her heart ache. You look pretty, Mom, he said quietly. Thank you, sweetheart. Victoria knelt carefully, mindful of her dress. Are you ready? Ethan nodded, but then hesitated. Mom, I need to tell you something. The music changed the cue for the procession to begin. The coordinator was gesturing urgently. Can it wait until after the ceremony? Victoria asked. Ethan's expression became even more serious. I don't think so. But the bridesmaids were already moving. The procession had begun, and the coordinator was ushering Ethan into position. Whatever he wanted to say would have to wait. Victoria took her place at the back of the church, alone. Her father had passed away years ago, and she'd opted to walk herself down the aisle, a symbol of her independence, her self-sufficiency. The music swelled, the guests rose, and the doors to the main sanctuary opened wide. James stood at the altar, handsome in his tuxedo, smiling at her with genuine love. Their friends and colleagues filled the pews, along with James's large extended family. Everything was perfect, exactly as planned. Victoria took her first step down the aisle, and then the church doors behind her crashed open. The music faltered. Heads turned. A collective gasp rippled through the congregation. Victoria froze, then slowly turned to face the source of the disruption. Standing in the doorway, Backlit by the morning sun streaming through the open doors, was Alexander Reed. A decade had changed him. The lean architecture student had become a commanding presence, a broader shoulders, a more chiseled face, confidence radiating from every inch of his frame. His custom suit couldn't hide the tension in his body as his eyes locked with Victoria's. But it wasn't Alexander who made her bouquet slip from suddenly nerveless fingers. It was the small figure beside him, clutching his hand. Ethan. Her son, their son, standing beside his father, chin raised in that stubborn way she knew so well. Victoria. Alexander's voice carried through the stunned silence of the church. Before you say, I do, your son wants to know why you told him I was dead. The words hung in the air like shattered glass. Victoria couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't process the impossible scene before her. How was Ethan there? When had he slipped away? How had he found Alexander? From the altar, James stepped forward. Victoria? What's happening? But Victoria couldn't answer. Her carefully constructed world was collapsing around her. Years of secrets exposed in the most public, devastating way possible. Alexander moved forward, Ethan still holding his hand. The resemblance between them, side by side, was undeniable. The same determined set of the jaw, the same intense eyes, even the same way of standing. Father and son, united by blood, and now by shared betrayal. I think, Alexander said, his voice controlled but vibrating with emotion, that we need to talk. The person you're avoiding right now, they might be the one waiting to forgive you. Comment if this hit different. Like if you felt that in your chest. Share it, because someone you know is living this lie right now. The next few minutes passed in a blur. The wedding coordinator, displaying remarkable crisis management skills, quickly ushered the stunned guests to the reception venue, announcing that the ceremony would be briefly delayed. James's mother was nearly apoplectic, his father grimly silent. Sophia took charge of the bridesmaids, while the minister discreetly retreated to his office, offering it as a private space for whatever conversation needed to happen. Now Victoria stood in that office, still in her wedding gown, facing Alexander and Ethan. James had insisted on staying, standing protectively at her side, his face a mask of confusion and growing anger. Would someone please explain what's going on? James demanded, his voice tight with controlled fury. Victoria couldn't take her eyes off Ethan. How did you? When did you? I emailed him, Ethan said simply. 3 days ago. I found his company website and sent him a message. Alexander's expression softened as he looked at his son. The subject line was, I think I'm your son. He included a photo of himself and said his mother had told him his father was dead, but he'd seen my picture online and noticed the resemblance. I told him Mom was getting married on Saturday, Ethan continued, and that he should come if he wanted to meet me. Victoria felt dizzy. Ethan, why didn't you tell me? Would you have let him come? Ethan challenged, suddenly seeming older than his 9 years. Victoria had no answer. The truth was, she didn't know what she would have done. Wait, James interrupted. Are you saying this man is Ethan's biological father? The one you told me died before Ethan was born? Victoria nodded, unable to form words. And you, James turned to Alexander, had no idea you had a son until 3 days ago? None, Alexander confirmed, his eyes never leaving Victoria's face. I was told nothing. James ran a hand through his hair, his composure cracking. This is insane. Victoria, we're supposed to be getting married right now. There are hundreds of people waiting at the Four Seasons. I know, Victoria whispered. I'm sorry. Sorry? James's voice rose. You've been lying to me, to everyone for years, and all you can say is sorry? That's enough, Alexander said quietly but firmly. This isn't helping. James rounded on him. And who exactly are you to dictate what happens here? You show up after a decade, crash my wedding, and expect to call the shots. I'm Ethan's father, Alexander replied, his calm in stark contrast to James's growing agitation. And I have 9 years of lost time to account for. Ethan, who had been watching this adult confrontation with wide eyes, suddenly spoke up. Please don't fight. This is my fault. I just wanted to meet my dad before Mom got married. The simple statement cut through the tension. Victoria knelt before her son, heedless of her wedding dress.
Ethan, none of this is your fault. None of it.
The mistakes were made by adults who should have known better. She glanced up at Alexander. By me. Alexander's expression softened slightly at her admission. Perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere more private, and without an audience waiting for a wedding that may not happen today. James stiffened. May not happen? Victoria, are you seriously considering postponing our wedding because this man suddenly appears? Victoria rose slowly, feeling the weight of 3 expectant gazes, her fiancé, her former love, and her son. The choice before her wasn't just about today's ceremony. It was about honesty. About facing the consequences of decisions made years ago. About what kind of example she wanted to set for Ethan. James, she said gently, I can't get married today. Not like this. Not with so many unresolved questions. The hurt in James's eyes was palpable. I see. He stepped back, physically and emotionally distancing himself. Well, I'll leave you to your family reunion. Someone should inform our guests that there won't be a wedding after all. James, please. But he was already walking away. His back, rigid with wounded pride. Victoria couldn't blame him. In his position, she would have reacted the same way, or worse. As the door closed behind James, Victoria was left alone with Alexander and Ethan, the family that might have been the truth she'd avoided for so long. I think, Alexander said quietly, that we have a lot to talk about. An hour later, Victoria emerged from the bridal suite, having changed into the clothes she'd worn to the church that morning. The 3 of them sat in a quiet corner of a nearby cafe, an untouched pot of tea growing cold between them. Ethan, exhausted by the emotional morning, had fallen asleep with his head on Alexander's shoulder, a sight so natural, yet so surreal, that Victoria couldn't stop staring at them. He has your eyes, she said softly. Everyone always commented on it, but I'd tell them he got them from my grandmother. Alexander's hand gently stroked Ethan's hair. He has your determination, and apparently, my obsession with buildings. He's been drawing them since he could hold a crayon. I should have known it wasn't coincidence. A heavy silence fell between them. 9 years of unspoken words and missed moments pressing down like a physical weight. Why, Victoria? Alexander finally asked, his voice low to avoid waking Ethan. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell me? Victoria stared into her teacup, searching for an answer that wouldn't sound like an excuse. At first, I was just in shock. By the time I found out I was pregnant, you were already in Singapore. You'd made it clear your career came first. That's not fair, Alexander countered, though without heat. We both chose our careers. You refused to consider coming to Singapore just as much as I refused to stay. You're right, Victoria admitted. But then weeks passed, and it seemed too late to reach out. I told myself you were building your dream, that a child would only complicate things, hold you back. That wasn't your decision to make. I know that now. Victoria looked up, meeting his gaze directly. I was wrong, Alexander. Terribly wrong. I convinced myself I was being noble, sparing you from an obligation you never asked for. But the truth is, I was scared. Scared of rejection, scared of raising a child with someone who might resent us both for derailing his ambitions. Alexander was quiet for a long moment, absently stroking Ethan's hair. I built that building in Singapore, he finally said. The one we argued about. It won awards, launched my career, everything I'd hoped for. I know, I've seen it online. It's beautiful. And every time I look at it, I think about what it cost me. His eyes held hers. I should have called you, Victoria. After the project was complete. After I'd proven myself. Pride kept me away. I told myself you'd moved on. That you'd made your choice. We both made choices we regret, Victoria said softly. The difference is, my choices only hurt myself. Yours affected all 3 of us. There was no accusation in his tone, just a statement of fact. Ethan, grew up without a father. I missed 9 years of my son's life, years I can never get back. Victoria felt tears threatening. I don't know how to make this right, Alexander. Neither do I, he admitted. But for Ethan's sake, we need to try. Ethan stirred then, lifting his head and blinking sleepily. Are you guys done fighting? We're not fighting, buddy, Alexander assured him. Just talking about complicated adult things. Ethan sat up, suddenly more alert. So does this mean you're my dad now? Like, officially? Alexander glanced at Victoria, who nodded permission. I've always been your dad, Ethan. I just didn't know it until recently. But yes, officially and in every way that matters, I'm your father. Cool. Ethan's smile was tentative, but genuine. Can I call you Dad? Victoria watched Alexander's composure crack, emotion flooding his face. I would like that very much. What about James? Ethan asked, his expression growing uncertain. He's been nice to me. I don't want him to be sad. James is a good man, Victoria said carefully. And you can still see him if you want to. But right now, we need to figure out what this new situation means for all of us. Does it mean we're a family? Ethan asked, with the direct simplicity of a child. The question hung between them, enormous and unanswerable. Alexander and Victoria exchanged a long look, years of history and hurt mingling with the impossible hope in their son's eyes. It means, Alexander said slowly, that you have a father who wants very much to be part of your life, and a mother who loves you more than anything. However that looks going forward, those things are true. It wasn't the fairy tale answer Ethan was hoping for, but it was honest. And perhaps honesty was what they all needed most now. After the dust settled from the wedding that wasn't, Victoria found herself navigating a reality more complicated than any she'd imagined. James, understandably, had ended their relationship. His parting words, I can't marry someone who kept such a fundamental secret from me, were fair, even if they stung. The society pages that had once announced their engagement now buzzed with speculation about the dramatic wedding interruption and the mystery billionaire who'd claimed to be the bride's former love. Victoria's colleagues were sympathetic but curious. Her mother, calling from Florida, was equal parts shocked and disapproving. But the most difficult conversation was yet to come. He wants to spend time with Ethan, Victoria told Sophia over coffee in her kitchen. Starting with a trip to New York this weekend, to see his firm and apartment. Sophia, ever the pragmatist, stirred her coffee thoughtfully. And how do you feel about that? Terrified, Victoria admitted. What if Ethan likes Alexander more than me? What if he resents me for keeping them apart all these years? Victoria, you're his mother. The bond you've built over 9 years doesn't disappear because his father shows up. But Ethan deserves to know Alexander. And maybe, Sophia added gently, you deserve a second chance too. At what? A relationship? After everything that's happened? At being honest with yourself about what you really want. Victoria had been avoiding that question, but now it demanded an answer. What did she want? She'd convinced herself that James represented the right choice, stable, predictable, safe. But watching Alexander with Ethan, seeing the instant connection between father and son, made her wonder if she'd been trying to recreate something she'd lost rather than moving forward. The truth was, seeing Alexander again had awakened feelings she'd thought long buried. Not just the memory of young love, but something deeper recognition of a person who understood her in ways James never had. But was that enough? Could they overcome a decade of separation and the massive betrayal of her secret? And more importantly, should they even try? Or would it just make an already complicated situation worse? Alexander stood in his Manhattan office, looking at the architectural model of his Dubai project, the crowning achievement of his career so far. His COO, Marcus, leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. So, you're really taking the weekend off? You haven't taken a full weekend off since ever, actually. I have 9 years to make up for, Alexander replied, adjusting a tiny tree on the model. The contracts can wait. The board was surprisingly understanding, all things considered. Though the story of you crashing a wedding to claim your secret son has made you somewhat of a legend around the office. Alexander winced. I didn't exactly plan it that way. Ethan invited me, and I couldn't not go. No judgment here. I'm just impressed you chose your son over the Dubai signing. The old Alex would have sent a lawyer and scheduled a paternity test. The old Alex didn't know he had a son, Alexander said quietly. Becoming a father changes your priorities, even if it happens 9 years late. Marcus moved into the office, his expression more serious. Are you going to pursue custody? Because your lawyers are already drawing up options? No. Alexander's response was immediate and firm. Victoria may have kept him from me, but she's been an excellent mother. Ethan is happy, well-adjusted, thriving. I won't disrupt his life with a custody battle. We'll figure out co-parenting like reasonable adults. And Victoria? What about her? Alexander turned away from the model, a wry smile on his face. What about her? Don't play dumb. You flew to Boston and crashed her wedding. That's not just about claiming your son. It was about stopping her from marrying the wrong person. Because you're still in love with her? Alexander was silent for a long moment, staring out at the Manhattan skyline. I don't know what I feel about Victoria anymore. Love? Anger? Betrayal? Attraction? It's all tangled together. The woman I loved was 23 and full of dreams. The woman standing in that church is someone different now. We both are. But you want to find out, Marcus pressed. Whether those feelings still mean something. For Ethan's sake, we need to learn to work together, Alexander said carefully. Whether that becomes something more, I honestly don't know. And I'm not sure it would be wise to find out. Yet even as he said the words, Alexander knew he was lying to himself. The moment he'd seen Victoria in that wedding dress, looking more beautiful than he'd remembered, every protective wall he'd built came crashing down. He hadn't just wanted to stop the wedding for Ethan's sake. He'd wanted to stop it for himself. But admitting that felt dangerous. Victoria had lied to him for 9 years. Trust, once broken so thoroughly, could it ever be rebuilt? Forgiveness isn't a moment. It's a slow construction. One honest word, one painful admission, one careful step at a time. They were beginners again, building something they'd once demolished. The weekend in New York was Ethan's first extended visit with his father. Victoria stood at the train station watching Alexander kneel to speak to their son, going over the itinerary he'd carefully planned. We'll see my office, then the Highline Park, then dinner at this great Italian place I know. Tomorrow, we'll go to the Natural History Museum, and can we see the architecture exhibit? Ethan asked eagerly. And maybe see some of your buildings? Alexander's face lit up. Absolutely. I have a few projects in the city I can show you. Victoria felt an unexpected pang. Not jealousy exactly, but a sense of being left out. For 9 years, she'd been Ethan's entire world. Now she was learning to share him, and it was harder than she'd anticipated. Alexander stood, his eyes meeting hers. I'll have him back Sunday evening. I've already got his dietary restrictions and bedtime routine from your email. I know. You've been very thorough. Victoria hesitated, then added, thank you for taking this slowly, for not pushing for more than he's ready for. He's my son, Victoria. I want what's best for him, even if that means taking things one step at a time. Alexander paused, then added more quietly, and despite everything, I know you want what's best for him too. You always have. It was the closest they'd come to discussing the elephant between them. Her deception, his absence, the complicated mess of their shared history. Not quite forgiveness, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. Train's boarding, the station announcer called. Ethan hugged Victoria tightly. Don't be sad, Mom. I'll be back soon, and you can use the weekend to rest. You work too much. Victoria laughed through sudden tears. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise, Ethan said with 9-year-old confidence. You just haven't noticed because you're too busy saving lives. As Victoria watched the train pull away, Ethan's face pressed against the window waving goodbye. She felt something shift inside her. For years, she'd carried the weight of her secret alone, convinced it was necessary to protect everyone. Now the truth was out, And while the situation was messy and complicated, there was also a strange sense of relief. No more lies, no more pretending, just the complicated reality of co-parenting with a man she'd once loved, whose presence in her life now felt both familiar and terrifyingly uncertain. Sophia, who'd driven her to the station, put an arm around her shoulders. "You okay?" "I don't know," Victoria admitted, "but maybe that's okay too." In New York, Alexander and Ethan navigated the beginning of their relationship with a mixture of excitement and awkwardness. Over pizza, at Alexander's favorite neighborhood spot, Ethan peppered him with questions. "What's your favorite building in the world?" "The Sagrada Familia in Barcelona," Alexander answered without hesitation. "It's been under construction for over a century, and it's still not finished. It teaches you that the greatest works of art can't be rushed." "Have you ever designed something that important?" "Not yet, but I'm working on it. The Dubai project is close. It's designed to be completely self-sustaining, producing its own energy and water. If it works, it could change how we think about urban living." Ethan's eyes widened. "That's so cool. Can I see the plans?" "Tomorrow at the office, I'll show you everything," Alexander promised. Then, more tentatively, "Ethan, can I ask you something about your mom?" Ethan nodded, suddenly serious. "Do you understand why she didn't tell me about you? Has she explained it in a way that makes sense?" Ethan considered this carefully, swirling his straw in his soda. "She said she was scared, and that sometimes people make mistakes because they're trying to protect people they love." "Do you believe that?" "I think." Ethan paused, choosing his words with care. "I think Mom made a mistake, but I also think she's been a really good mom. She works super hard, but she's always there for me. She comes to all my art shows and parent-teacher conferences. She helped me build a model of the Chrysler Building last year, even though it took weeks." "She sounds like a wonderful mother," Alexander said softly. "She is, but she's also really lonely sometimes. She tries to hide it, but I notice." Ethan looked up at Alexander with those eerily perceptive eyes. James was nice, but he wasn't right for her. "How do you know?" "Because she never looked at him the way she looked at your picture on the computer. Like she was seeing someone she used to know a long time ago and missed." Alexander's heart clenched at the observation. "Your mom and I have a complicated history, buddy." "I know, but maybe now that I've found you, things can get uncomplicated." If only it were that simple, Alexander thought. But looking at his son's hopeful face, he found himself wanting to believe it too. Time has a way of healing what truth couldn't fix. The weeks that followed established a new normal. Alexander flew to Boston every other weekend, taking Ethan for outings that ranged from Red Sox games to visits to architectural firms. Ethan spent alternating school breaks in New York, gradually becoming familiar with his father's world. Victoria and Alexander learned to communicate tentatively at first, then with growing ease. Logistics about Ethan's schedule expanded into conversations about his interests, his friends, his dreams. Slowly, carefully, they were building something new from the ruins of what they'd once had. But the tension between them remained unspoken attraction, mingling with unresolved hurt, the question of what if hovering in every interaction. One evening when Alexander arrived to pick up Ethan for dinner, he found Victoria struggling with a leaking pipe under the kitchen sink. "The plumber can't come until tomorrow," she explained, water dripping onto the towels she'd spread beneath the cabinet. "And of course this happens right before I need to leave for the hospital." "Let me look at it," Alexander offered, kneeling beside her. Working together in the confined space, their hands accidentally brushed. Both froze, the simple contact charged with sudden awareness. Victoria looked up, finding Alexander's face inches from hers. His eyes locked on hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Victoria," he began, his voice low. "Mom, Dad, I can't find my Yankees cap." Ethan's voice rang out from upstairs, shattering the moment. They pulled apart quickly, both flustered. Alexander cleared his throat. The connection was loose. "Should hold now." "Thank you," Victoria managed, her heart racing. As Alexander headed upstairs to help Ethan find his cap, Victoria remained in the kitchen, her hand pressed to her chest where her heart hammered. What was happening to her? Was she falling for Alexander again? Or had she never really stopped? And more importantly, if there was still something between them, did she have the courage to explore it? Or would acting on these feelings just complicate an already delicate co-parenting situation? Alexander struggled with similar questions. His work had always been his refuge, the place where he could control outcomes and design solutions. But emotions didn't follow blueprints. You couldn't engineer love or draft forgiveness. "You're distracted," Marcus observed during a Dubai video conference. "You've been staring at the same structural drawing for 10 minutes. Alexander forced his attention back to the screen. "Sorry." "Long night." "Ethan, okay?" "Ethan's great. He's incredible, Marcus. Smart, creative, kind. Sometimes I look at him and can't believe I had any part in creating someone so perfect." "So it's not Ethan who's keeping you up. It's Victoria." Alexander didn't bother denying it. "Every time I see her, it gets harder. We'll be discussing Ethan's school schedule, and I'll notice the way she tucks her hair behind her ear when she's thinking. Or she'll laugh at something Ethan says, and I'll remember that laugh. Remember how it felt to be the one making her laugh. So tell her how you feel. And risk disrupting the co-parenting relationship we've carefully built? What if she doesn't feel the same way? What if she does, but we try and fail again, and it makes everything worse for Ethan?" Marcus leaned back in his chair, looking at Alexander through the screen with fond exasperation. "You design buildings that push the boundaries of what's possible. You take calculated risks that would terrify other architects. But with Victoria, you're paralyzed by what if." "Because the stakes are higher," Alexander said quietly. "I can rebuild a failing structure. I can't rebuild my son's sense of security if his parents try and fail at a relationship." "Fair point. But you also can't build anything new if you're too afraid to lay the foundation." The breakthrough came unexpectedly, as transformative moments often do. Ethan had a school presentation on someone you admire, and he'd asked both Victoria and Alexander to attend. They sat in the Westwood Academy auditorium, several seats apart, as Ethan took the stage for his Someone You Admire presentation. "The person I admire most," Ethan began, his voice steady despite his nervousness, "isn't just one person. It's two people who taught me important things without meaning to." He clicked to his first slide, a photo of Victoria in her white coat at the hospital. "My mom taught me that you can be strong and successful and still make mistakes. She's one of the best surgeons in Boston, and she's saved lots of kids' lives. But she also made a really big mistake once, and instead of hiding from it or making excuses, she admitted she was wrong. That takes more courage than being perfect ever could." Victoria felt tears pricking her eyes as Ethan continued. "The second person is my dad." The slide changed to a photo of Alexander at a construction site. "He taught me that it's never too late to show up. He missed the first 9 years of my life, but when he found out about me, he didn't let that stop him. He could have been angry or decided it was too complicated, but instead, he became my dad. Not because it was easy, but because it mattered." The final slide showed a photo Sophia had taken weeks ago, Victoria, Alexander, and Ethan at the Boston Public Garden, feeding ducks. They weren't posing, just existing together naturally. And something about the image captured a truth Victoria hadn't been ready to acknowledge. They looked like a family. "I admire people who make mistakes and fix them," Ethan concluded. "Who show up even when it's hard. Who choose love over pride. That's what makes someone really admirable. Not being perfect, but being brave enough to try." As the audience applauded, Victoria and Alexander's eyes met across the empty seats between them. In that moment, all the careful distance they'd maintained, all the walls they'd built to protect themselves, felt suddenly ridiculous. After the presentation, as they stood in the school parking lot and Ethan ran ahead to the car, Alexander finally spoke the words he'd been holding back for months. "I'm still in love with you, Victoria. I tried not to be. I told myself what you did was unforgivable, that too much time had passed, that we were different people now. But none of that matters. I love who you were, and I love who you've become, and I hope you might feel the same way." Victoria looked at him, this man who'd once been her whole world, then her greatest regret, and now, what? Her co-parent? Her friend? Or something more? "I'm terrified," she admitted, We tried once and failed. What if we fail again? And it hurts, Ethan. What if we don't try and spend the rest of our lives wondering what if? Alexander countered. We're not the same people who broke up a decade ago, Vic. We've grown, learned, suffered. Maybe that's exactly what we needed to get it right this time. And if it doesn't work, then we handle it like adults, the way we've been handling everything else. But I'd rather try and know than spend another decade building buildings while wondering if I let the right woman walk away twice. Victoria thought about the wedding she'd almost had, the life she'd almost chosen with James safe, predictable, easy. Then she thought about Alexander, complicated and challenging, and still able to make her heart race after all these years. I love you too, she said, the words both terrifying and liberating. I never stopped. I just convinced myself I had to. Alexander closed the distance between them, his hand coming up to cup her face with a tenderness that made her eyes water. So where do we go from here? Slowly, Victoria said, carefully, with Ethan's well-being as our priority, but together. Together, Alexander agreed. Then, with that smile she'd fallen for a lifetime ago, I can work with that. When they kissed, it felt like coming home and starting over all at once, familiar yet new, the past and future colliding in a single perfect moment. From the car, Ethan watched his parents with a satisfied smile, then pulled out his sketchbook. He began drawing a house, not just any house, but the one from his dreams. The one with curved roof lines and unusual windows. The one his father had once designed, his mother had never forgotten, and Ethan had somehow always known. The house where their family would finally live together. Don't wait for a disaster to reveal the truth you've been hiding. Like this video if secrets have ever kept you from happiness. Comment, truth sets you free. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to make things right. And subscribe to Mr. Sterling's Secrets of Love. Because every story we tell might be the mirror you need to see your own life clearly. The Westwood Academy Auditorium buzzed with anticipation. Ethan's project, Sustainable Architecture for Future Generations, had already won regional recognition. Today, he would present to the selection committee that would determine his admission to the prestigious Architectural Magnet Program. In the audience sat Victoria and Alexander, their hands intertwined, matching silver bands on their fingers. They'd married quietly 6 months ago in a small ceremony at the Boston Public Garden, just family and close friends, with Ethan as the best man. He's going to be brilliant, Victoria whispered. He already is, Alexander replied, pride evident in his voice. As Ethan, now 14, took the stage, he stood before a display of his design's buildings that merged his father's vision with his own generation's concerns about climate and community. My father once told me that the greatest buildings tell stories, Ethan began. They're not just structures, they're promises about the future we want to build. He clicked to an image of Alexander's Dubai project. This building generates its own power and recycles every drop of water. My dad designed it to prove that luxury and sustainability aren't opposites, they're partners. Next slide. Ethan's own design, clearly influenced by, but distinct from, his father's work. My project takes that further. I designed a school that teaches while it functions, where students learn about energy by seeing how their building produces it, about ecosystems by participating in the rooftop gardens that feed them, about community by living in spaces designed for connection. Victoria squeezed Alexander's hand, their son brilliant, passionate, carrying both their legacies forward in ways neither of them could have alone. But buildings aren't just about design, Ethan continued. They're about people. The architect who designs them, the families who live in them, the communities they serve. My family taught me that. They taught me that the strongest structures are built on honesty, that the best foundations are laid by people willing to admit mistakes and start over. He clicked to the final image, the house they now lived in, designed by Alexander and built over the past year. It incorporated elements from his original sketch, Victoria's practical needs as a surgeon, and Ethan's environmental ideals. A home built not just with materials, but with second chances and hard-won wisdom. I want to be an architect, Ethan concluded. Not just to design buildings, but to design hope. To create spaces where families can heal, where communities can thrive, where the future doesn't just happen, it gets built. One careful, honest choice at a time. As the audience erupted in applause, Victoria found tears streaming down her face. Alexander pulled her close, and they watched their son, the child who'd brought them back together, who'd demanded truth when lies would have been easier, who'd become the best of both of them. "We did good," Alexander murmured. "We did," Victoria agreed. Eventually, they both laughed, because it was true. They'd made mistakes, taken wrong turns, lost years they couldn't reclaim, but they'd also found their way back, built something stronger from the broken pieces, and raised a son who understood that perfection wasn't the goal, honest effort was. After the presentation, as they stood together in the parking lot of family, finally and fully, Ethan looked between his parents with a grin. "So, that architectural program in Switzerland next summer. Any chance you'd both want to come? They have a section for professional architects and another for aspiring ones." Victoria and Alexander exchanged a glance, that wordless communication they'd redeveloped over the past year. "I think Reed Architectural Innovations can spare me for a summer," Alexander said. "And I'm due for a sabbatical," Victoria added. "Family architecture tour it is," Ethan declared, pulling out his ever-present sketchbook. "I'll start planning the buildings we need to see." As they walked to the car together, Victoria marveled at the improbable journey that had brought them here. From collision on a rainy Harvard afternoon, to heartbreak and separation, to the son who'd forced truth into the open, to this moment imperfect, complicated, and more beautiful than any fairy tale. "Hey," Alexander said softly, as Ethan ran ahead. "Thank you." "For what?" "For Ethan. For giving me a second chance. For being brave enough to try again." Victoria rose on her toes to kiss him gently. "Thank you for showing up. For fighting for us. For loving me even when I didn't deserve it." "You always deserved it," Alexander said. "We both just needed to grow into people who could accept it." And as they drove home through the Boston streets, past buildings Alexander had designed, and hospitals where Victoria saved lives, to the house they'd built together, they carried with them the hard-won knowledge that some stories don't end, they just begin again, better and wiser than before. Love gets lost. People wait too long. Don't let pride steal years you'll never get back. Subscribe to Mr. Sterling's Secrets of Love, because the next story might be the mirror you need. Like this video, if second chances are real. Comment your own story of lost love found. Share this with someone who deserves their own happy ending, because everyone does, even if the path there is longer and harder than we ever imagined.